Ted Dabrowski, thanks for joining us again on the All Night Channel, and we are coming to the viewers on Friday, March 13th, Friday the 13th. Yesterday was one of the biggest sell-offs in the history of the Dow Jones. The market was down over 2,000 points. And it has, as everyone knows, the market has gone down precipitously since about the beginning of February or so. In part, we were at all-time highs, so market watchers were expecting a correction, but the coronavirus came out of the blue. We are not going to talk so much about the coronavirus. The governor and the president are doing that on a daily basis, just about. But this is going to have some economic impacts that people may not be aware of, and we did want to talk to you about that. So in the big picture, what are some of the things that you see or some of the ramifications that we could see have happening as a result of this coronavirus?
Well, at the beginning, we weren't sure exactly how the country was going to react. Were we going to shut down things? Were events going to be canceled and things like that? But a few days into this now, we know that things like at the McCormick place is being closed down or shut down for a while. Schools are being shut. NBA has canceled their games. NHL has canceled their games. So we're seeing a very, very big impact, and it's going to have a huge economic impact. Airlines are not being traveled on. So what we're going to see across the country is a lot of businesses that are going to struggle, especially those that are smaller that don't have a whole lot of free cash on hand. It's going to be a big deal, and then not only that, it's going to trickle down to every person that works in these kind of places. So, you think about the waiters and the people who work in hotels and the people who are working for airlines. It's going to have a huge trickle down effect, and so we don't know how deep this is going to be. We don't know how long it's going to last, but it's going to put a big stress. And the big question now is does it create a recession? And that means that we have negative growth for maybe 3 to 6 months. And so what we need to do is figure out what that means to the Chicago budget. What does it mean for the state budget? What does it mean for people's incomes, their behavior, their home values? It's all a very, very dangerous moment, and it all depends on whether this thing persists for a long time or whether we're lucky and it passes through quickly and we get a V-shaped recovery. We don't know, but we should talk a little bit more about what that means for the state budget, the city budget, and for ordinary Illinoisans who are going to get hit pretty hard.
Let me say, yesterday I mentioned the market was down about 2,000 points as we taped this on the 13th of March. Earlier today, the market rebounded up 1,300 points. At the moment, it is up about 150. And I tell people every day the stock market is a tug of war between greed and fear. We're certainly seeing that now. And so we have these great swings. Now, just about a year ago in April, the state of Illinois was surprised to find out that because of the strong growth of the economy, they had an extra $1.4 billion in revenue come in that they had not been anticipating. So to your point that you were just talking about, this is because of the globalization, because of the impact on China, what we see it happening in Europe, especially in Italy. And people often don't appreciate how much of our economy is linked to international markets, the trading between different countries, and that their job is tied to that. So as a result, we could have the opposite impact. We could have in April, all of a sudden, a negative surprise where not enough money is coming in. And I think you would say, while the governor's saying the state of Illinois budget is truly balanced, you would say, no, it's not really truly balanced.
Well, I can tell you, we've talked about this before. It wasn't balanced yesterday, and it wasn't balanced today. It's not balanced today. You're right. We had the surprise of additional monies come in last year, and that was very helpful to a budget that already had billions in whole. But I think you have to think about this problem today in a much deeper way. We've seen the president cancel flights from Europe. We've seen all these events being shut down. You're going to see, I think, more and more schools close. And so, think of it like the airlines. The airlines run a real big risk right now of whether they can stay alive or not. And we've heard from the U.S. Treasury Secretary today that They're going to provide some lifelines, I think, to the airlines so that they make sure they don't go broke. But United Airlines is headquartered right here in Chicago. What's going to happen to their employees and their business? So it's a big risk. And so when you look at a budget like Illinois, about $21 billion comes from income taxes. $21 billion of the budget is income taxes, personal income taxes. Well, if a whole bunch of people are out of work for 2 or 3 or 4 months, if this persists, you can bet that income taxes are going to take a hit in Illinois. If it's a 10% hit, you're talking about $2 billion. The state relies on about $800 million of sales taxes for the budget. Or 8 billion, I should say. I'm sorry, 8 billion. If you take a 10% hit, that's another 800 million hole in the budget. So you're talking about another $2 to $3 billion hole in the budget from what pretty much is at least officially a 2 to 3 billion hole already. So it creates a lot of issues, and same thing for Chicago, right? Chicago relies on the tourist industry. It relies on the hotels, people riding Ubers, people eating out, people at bars. When they cancel things like NCAA tournament, who's going to be out there partying and spending money?
Well,
it's going to be it's going to be a real tough environment, and we have to really plan for that. And what should be said is that Moody's, the rating agency, has come out and said that there's 2 states that are unprepared for a recession, and this is before this coronavirus. 2 states unprepared: Illinois and New Jersey. 2 cities unprepared for a recession: Chicago and Detroit. So we were already in a really bad shape beforehand.
Yeah, I just mentioned recently on a Facebook post, we just, as I said, the market was up to historic highs, and this should have been a time when our pensions were recovering, when, hey, finally, we're putting gas back in the tank. And yet the financial footing of our state pensions continues to go down. And as I was mentioning, if you're not going to be recovering in the best stock market in the history of mankind, then that's a neon sign that says these systems are not properly structured, and that they are frankly going to continue to go toward bankruptcy until such time as the state bites the bullet, does what they don't want to do, and restructures these so that they will be sustainable. Right now, they're not sustainable.
That's right, Terry. You're spot on. And we wrote about this 2 days ago and a little bit yesterday. These funds over the last decade, we had, like you said, a tripling in the markets. Everything was about as good as it could get in terms of stock market returns. And these pension funds are heavily invested in the stock market, 50 and 60%. So they were participating somewhat in those increases. The problem was that their holes are so big that they can't get out of the mess they're in. And so even under this decade of just amazing market bull run and strong economy, every one of our pension funds virtually got worse. In that decade when we had the boom, the Illinois unfunded liability grew by almost $60 billion. That was a 75% increase. That's how bad it was. Chicago got worse by over 100%. The unfunded amount grew by $16 billion just for the 4 city-run funds. That's a huge increase. I think it's 130%. All the downstate funds in this boom period all got worse by some 70%. It's
yeah, and here I wanted to bring up for the people, this is 50 years of the S&P 500, which I would tell, if you don't know, that's basically you're buying the American economy. 500 of the biggest corporations in the world on that. You can see the returns are phenomenal.
Especially if you look at the last decade, right? If you look from 2010 to 2020, that huge upward spike.
Up. I mean, with obviously just temporarily, you can see right at the end, we have a vertical fall off, and that's what's happened over the last month or so. But there's, as I tell people, look, there's a lot of history that has happened over the last 50 years, a lot of bad history. Obviously, we had 9/11, we had this stock market crash, or the crash of the real estate market back in 2008, assassinations, impeachments of presidents. But the American economy is resilient, and yet one would think, and Ted, you can tell people how much money, a lot of people don't realize that pension money does go into the stock market. How much is typically in the market? And again, just to underscore for people, because money is in the stock market, how could our pensions be so precipitous, be falling off the cliff, be so financially unstable when we're looking at the growth of the American economy over these last 50 years, and as you say, over the last 10 years, that should have solved the problem. Why is it not solving our problem?
Yeah, these funds have been in decay for about 3 decades. Some more recent, but others, for a long time. And so the big problem that we've talked about is that the promises that they dole out, these pension plans, they grow much faster than the money that can be pumped in from taxpayers. And taxpayers have been paying some of the highest taxes in the nation in Illinois for the last several decades. So it's not for the lack of taxpayer money going in, it's that the promises have grown so fast. They've never been able to keep up. And so the hole has gotten bigger and bigger. And the bigger the promises these funds make, well, the more risk they have to take to try to make up for it. And so, yeah, you'll see these pension funds have 50 and 60% in equities. And it's not just equities. They've had money in these hedge funds. They have money in real estate, in currencies. They have lots of risk. And, to pay out the promises they're making, they have to take lots of risk. Now, the sad part is that if they get it right, they have higher earnings and they make the pension funds a little more healthy. But if they get it wrong, they just turn to taxpayers and ask for more money. And so it's really a corrupt system. It's a broken system. I almost hesitate to use the word fraudulent, but it's a system that doesn't work. And if you look now at what's happening in the markets, you've got places like the Chicago Police Fund, the Chicago Fire Fund, or the Kankakee Fire Fund. Most of them have very little money left. And so they're between a rock and a hard place now. They can't afford to put the money in the stock market. It's too risky. They have so little money left that if they lose it, they're broke. By the same token, here's the other thing that's happened in the markets now. Interest rates have collapsed. The 10-year interest rate is below 1%. So if these funds want to play it safe and park their money somewhere, well, they only get 1%, which is far short of the 6 and 7 and 8% that they've been promising effectively to their pensioners. So it's the reason I say it's fraudulent is because they're promising something that grows really fast, and yet they can't invest that money safely and get those kind of returns. It doesn't work, and this is why we're going to find out. If this thing persists, Illinois' weakest pension funds are going to really show just how bad they are.
Yeah, the way I explain it is the average rate of return in the market over about 70 years is on average 8%. Some years you're up 30%, other years you're down, but about 8% a year. So if you have $100,000 put aside in a pension, you could be paid roughly, say 6%, and then occasionally have a boost. But you can't put $100,000 aside and have a pension of $50,000 a year and think you're going to be having that coming in for 30 years. The amount of benefits promised relative to the money that they put in is way out of sync. And everyone else, the taxpayers, are living off of their savings, off their 401k and market returns, maybe what their house may have grown, but not in government pensions. In government pensions, there's a tooth fairy that keeps throwing money into the pension systems to pay these benefits that are exorbitant relative to the amount of money that was set aside to pay them. Is that, in short,
Well, in short, yes. I mean, you have to add a couple things to that. Is that the system, right? The system in the Constitution said we should never reduce. We have to protect those benefits, but it never says anywhere that we can just keep raising those benefits. And so when you look at spiking at the end of periods, we have guaranteed spikes in teacher contracts. Everybody gets the last 4 years of their work, they'll get a 6% automatic increase. Things like that really push up the pension costs, and that's not contemplated in the Constitution nor in the model. So it just keeps getting, the promises keep getting more and more expensive. People are living longer and longer. The people are still retiring, and the tier 1 employees, the ones that have the pension plans, the older generation pension plans, are still retiring in their 50s, and it just doesn't work. And then you have to remember that when it doesn't work, when things are collapsing like they are today, the funds are going to use more taxpayer funds, more taxpayer money, higher taxes. You've got a place like Peoria that just implemented a pension fee. so they could fund police and fire pensions. Danville just implemented a pension fee. So you've got places that are taking more and more money and putting it into pensions. But at the time that the pension plans need more money is when the ordinary taxpayer is taking a hit too, right? So right now, the ordinary taxpayer is looking at his 401k, her 401k, and saying, "What the heck just happened?" Right? 30%, 28% down as of yesterday. And at the same time, the government's going to come and say, "Hey, we need more of your money so we can fund pensions." And that's what I mean by a broken system. It's not a fair system. It doesn't work, and it won't work.
One of the things that the governor, long before this coronavirus thing came about, one of the things the governor was saying he wanted to do is have a change to the Illinois Constitution, so we would go from a flat income tax of 4.95% on everyone's adjusted income to a progressive tax where those making over $250,000 a year would be paying more than the 4.95%, and it's a graduated scale upwards. Do you see any impact that may or have, or what impact will coronavirus have on that discussion?
Well, it's still a few months away. Of course, the November ballot is in November during the election, and we don't know what's going to happen between now and then. But I can tell you what's happening now across the world. Across the world, people are talking about how to make it easier on consumers and ordinary residents. So that, if you look at what the president is talking about as a payroll tax cut, they're looking at easing borrowing costs. They're looking at helping ordinary people. So when you hear, and they're not talking about tax hikes, they're talking about tax cuts. So when you hear in Illinois that there's going to be a massive $3.4 billion tax hike targeted at, in theory right now, it's targeted at the wealthy, those making $200,000 and above. It's going to sound a little crazy when we've just had a massive hit to everybody's incomes, right? Either the economy, and as we talked about, whether it's the hotel worker and all those people who are looking for jobs and they need money in the economy. And also you take a look at the people in the 401ks, they're all taking hits. The last thing that they need is a massive tax hike, not to mention that if the economy does take a hit, you're talking about even a bigger hole in Illinois and maybe another $3 billion hole if we were a 10% hit to sales and income taxes. Progressive taxes won't help that. It'll actually make everything harder and worse. Yeah, and so what it should be, Terry, is that the impetus should be that we reform things, and that's what people are going to be looking for. And you got to wonder, all the bad companies that have bad credit ratings, some of them will get rated junk after what's happening because of the economy. You have to wonder what's going to be, how they're looking at Illinois under a stress scenario like this.
I'll mention as we sit here today, the mayor had a press conference, the head of Grubhub in Chicago saying he's going to be working. I think nationally they're going to cut $100 million out of their fees they charge restaurants for delivery of food. The Fed just said they're going to put about $1 trillion more liquidity into the economy. But I would tell people, okay, and that's all very nice. We're criticizing that, but those are Band-Aids. Those are Band-Aids over this momentary problem we have with the coronavirus. The coronavirus will go away and the rest of the economy will hopefully come back as we always have. And we saw earlier, despite a lot of bad things happening over 50 years, the market and the economy has grown strongly. But Illinois is not, that's not going to help Illinois. The problem is we had all these problems you and I are talking about here long before the coronavirus. And so what this is exposing is that the systems we have are broken. They're broken because they didn't recover when the economy was doing great. And now that we have a problem come along like that, we are simply not prepared. We are, in short, driving down the highway without a spare tire in the trunk, and then we just get a flat tire. So, leadership in politics is about managing our collective assets. And I would say, I'm not blaming Governor Pritzker, he just walked in the door a year ago. But we do have a broken system, and we're going to have to respond to it. And, the progressive income tax is not going to fix pension problems.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough period in the economy, and we know that our political leaders will need to do the things they need to do. And I know President Trump and others are trying to get the liquidity into this system, trying to help the workers who are going to be impacted. And this is not a fiscal problem. It's not an economic problem. These are nationally problems created by a virus, which is a dislocator, and hopefully everything will be, quote, back to normal, 6 months, a year from now, we hope. But when you come to Illinois, what's happened is the last decade has hidden all the cracks that exist here, right? The booming stock markets, the national economy, the low, that's really helped Illinois hide every one of its problems. Now they're going to be exposed, and the question is, do we have any leadership to say, okay, we're gonna take our medicine and do the right things, or are we going to again try to kick the can down the road? But we can only kick it down the road so far, and I think the crisis may expose that problem, especially with the weaker pension funds, because if this thing persists, again, if it persists, we don't know if it will. It's gonna squeeze the Chicago Police Fund, the Fire Fund, and Kankakee, and Harvey, and East St. Louis, and those that are already in trouble to begin with.
There's just a little bit of news. First of all, the president's going to speak to have a press conference this afternoon. The Illinois channel will carry that live. Of course, if you're watching this after the fact. But the news is that the president's going to declare a national emergency over the coronavirus, just coming across the screen. I don't know what necessarily that means specifically, but for what it's worth, again, what I think this exposes, and part of this coronavirus is exposing problems we have both at the national level. We've heard now that China's making all of our pharmaceutical drugs. That shouldn't be. We need to have our own infrastructure of drugs. I mean, what are we going to do with people who can't get their blood pressure medicine? That's a man-made problem that we did to ourselves. And you know what? Illinois' pension problems are man-made problems. And so we can address those, and we can fix it, and we can have Illinois get back on a solid fiscal footing. But you're going to have to change the policies that got you here. And until the politicians are ready to do that and admit that, then I guess the only option is that people can move out of the state, as we've seen them do.
Yeah, that's not.
Unless Ted, I should ask, do you have any solutions you want to propose? Because the governor has named Wirepoints, singled you guys out as just basically people who complain about things, but aren't offering positive solutions. So I should have asked you early on if you have any solutions. Let's go ahead and have you.
Oh, absolutely. We've talked about this before. The first thing that we recommend, and we highly recommend, is that the governor stop saying that he opposes pension reform. He says he does not want a constitutional amendment to the Pension Protection Clause. Well, if the governor doesn't want to do that, we can't ever get started with reform. So that's number one. And we would ask immediately to move to a defined contribution plan going forward. We can look to Rhode Island as a place that did major reforms back in 2011. They had the second worst pension plan after Illinois, and they made a huge political move to reform their pension plans. They froze COLAs. They did all kinds of very difficult things to try to survive. I argue they didn't go far enough because they still have a big burden, but they were certainly bold. Then you move to things like retiree health care. Today, state workers in Illinois get free retiree health insurance after 20 years of work. Nobody gets free retiree health insurance anywhere. Why do we give that? That's something that Governor Pritzker could reform tomorrow. And I
would say the Illinois Supreme Court has said that these health payments are part and parcel of pensions, and therefore they're protected. So I would say the governor couldn't change that tomorrow. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But he could offer a constitutional amendment to get rid of the diminishment clause so that our hands are not tied. People don't want to pull the rug out from underneath retirees or even those who are working for pension, but by the same token, how does that help people getting a pension if your systems are going to collapse? Exactly. How does that help anyone?
When you look at the Chicago Fire and the Chicago Police plans, Chicago Fire is about 18% funded. It's already broken. If I were a Chicago policeman, especially a young one, I don't know what I'd be thinking. I would not be expecting a pension. But Terry, there's a couple things that can be done, and Governor Pritzker hasn't done any of them under emergency measures. He could change for new employees, no more free retiree health insurance. For new employees, a defined contribution plan. He could do that right now if he demanded it, of course, through legislative approval. What he hasn't done, they haven't done salary freezes. He came on and he gave massive increases to AFSCME. Lori Lightfoot didn't freeze salaries. If she can't touch pensions, why didn't she freeze salaries? She didn't freeze salaries with the Chicago Teachers Union. Instead, she gave the largest contract and increases in CTU history. So they're not taking any action at all. As a matter of fact, what they're doing is they're making things worse. That's Pritzker's contribution and Lightfoot's contribution to the pension crisis so far. They've made it worse. And by categorically denying the need for a pension clause change, they are, they're complicit in making this crisis worse. So there are things they can do. Another thing I'd like to see them do is make all, start consolidating governments and just say, hey, from now on, we're going to have all elementary districts combined with their unit districts. Now, with their high school districts, there's a lot that needs to be done correctly with that, but that's the kind of stuff that they could do now. They just refuse to do it.
Yeah, it's amazing how many, do you know how many people working in state government and or the educational establishment make over $100,000?
Oh, it's a big number. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but it's a big number.
I think people would be surprised. I mean, and again, the point isn't that you're trying to deny someone the benefit of their labor. That's not the point. But when we have the average rate of return, I was distracted. Apparently your lights went off.
I'm going to wave my arms to see if my lights went off. There it goes. Okay. I went to the dark.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought maybe we lost connection there for a minute. You're not trying to deny people the labor, but again, the whole point is to have systems that work. I mean, when you run a business, you have to have a system that works or you go out of business. And you try to have a surplus, known as a profit. In government, it would be nice to actually run a bit of a surplus, at least break even, and do that continually, even counting what your obligations are relative to things that are long-term, like a pension promise. But I would just say, and I know I'm editorializing here, but it's just common sense. It doesn't help pensioners to make them promises that you can't fulfill.
No, everybody's going to lose. The pensioners are going to lose. The taxpayers are going to lose. The people who are dependent on core services and seeing the money just being eaten up by pensions. Everybody's losing right now. And I think to your point, here's the point I think I would make it in a way. Illinois should think of its people as residents, as customers. And if you treat them well, if you respect them, if you give them long-term hope and opportunity, they'll stay. And Illinois right now, we know, has shrunk 5 years in a row. It has lost more people in these 5 years than any other, I guess in the last decade, than any other state in the nation. And when you look at outmigration, the movement of people between states, Illinois is the second biggest loser to New York over the last decade. We're losing our customers. And the people are saying, I can't get what I want here. The taxes are too high. It's too expensive to live here. There's not enough opportunity. My home is too expensive and it's losing value. Whatever it is, right? They're leaving for opportunities. They don't just leave because it's high taxes. They leave because things aren't working for them. And when we're losing this many people, you have to think about your residents as customers, and you have to treat them well, and you have to give them good reasons to stay here because they got 49 other states that they can shop in.
Well, and as we see, another thing with this coronavirus, how many people are saying work from home? You and I are talking, you're in Chicago, look what we're doing here. We can now do commerce over the internet. I mean, Amazon, this gorilla that's come out of nowhere over the last 25 years because of the internet. And so which means, we can, for a lot of things, where services are provided, whether you're in the insurance industry or any number of other industries where you don't have to necessarily be doing face-to-face meetings, you can be doing it from any state. And so if Illinois wants to prepare itself for the future is here, it's going to have to make some changes. You just can't be saying 50 years ago in the 1970 Constitution, we put in there mistakenly, maybe for good intentions, but we said you can't diminish pensions. That is tying the hands of future generations. And they couldn't know in 1970 about the internet. They couldn't know the problems we would be facing today. We shouldn't be bound by that. And we should be able to make, again, I'm editorializing, but it's just kind of common sense. If you're driving towards a financial cliff, maybe you ought to put the brakes on and turn the car around.
Yeah, it's amazing that Governor Pritzker is willing to touch the Constitution for his progressive tax proposal, but he won't even consider it. He won't even consider it for pensions. And a good pension reform can save billions of dollars a year if we do it right and do it fairly and do it sustainably. But coming back to the problem you mentioned, it's a global world, and a good friend of mine who I wrote about, who lives up in the North Shore, he's a investment advisor. His clients are all over the country. And he loves living here, but he said he looked at what we call that shadow mortgage, that those looming tax bills that are going to come for the next 3 decades and hit him with the equivalent of another mortgage. He said, why do I stick around? If I move to Colorado, is where he moved to. He's about to move. He bought the house 3 years ago and prepared it. His taxes here were $30,000 a year, property taxes. His taxes there were around $3,000. He was saving about $27,000 a year. And he said, if I move there, I save $27,000 a year for the next 20 years. If I invest that at a 6% return, I will have $1 million more than if I stay in Illinois. And in Illinois, he knew the crisis was never going to be fixed. So, this is the kind of mathematical calculation that wealthy people can do. $1 million to him is...
Well, and not just wealthy, I mean, the same thing. I mean, you might be paying $9,000 a year. I'm paying close to $9,000 a year in property taxes on the same home. If I moved to St. Louis, it would be, about $3,000.
Yeah, so I'm saying that the wealthy people can probably do a spreadsheet. Other people will just do it intuitively. They look across the border and they see a much cheaper house in Indiana, bigger house, bigger yard, lower taxes.
I mean, right there, that's 10 years of $60,000, savings a year.
Yeah.
Over 10 years, $60,000. My kids are already grown, but if you've got a child that's in 5th grade or something, I mean, that's going to be your kid's college education
that's
right
college
there.
Bill. Yeah, and that's the kind of decisions people make. And so, by not reforming pensions, we're creating the shadow mortgage that has grown to be, who knows, 200,000 plus on incomes that families that can pay that kind of amount, and they don't have to stay here to pay it. So they're doing what smart people do. They look around and they say, I'm out.
The governor and others, and I'm not being political here against the governor. I think in many ways he's done a good job in a lot of things. But the governor and some in the legislature might think we're just bad-mouthing them. We're not. We're trying to be helpful, to say, face up to the problems, and let's get real. Because the conversation you and I are having is being had by citizens across the state. It's being had by business people across the state. They're not fools. And they're not going to be sitting here as captive targets for a system that only works for some, but bankrupts everyone else. They're going to move.
I think you're right. I think that our political elite, sadly, think they're getting away with treating our people like fools, and people aren't stupid. They can be bamboozled for a while because the system is not very honest with its people. But people figured out. They figured out eventually, whether it's through their pocketbook or through talking to friends or seeing the lack of opportunities here and the possibilities elsewhere. And they're smart. They're smart, and eventually they do what's right.
Ted, before we went a little longer, I always seem to go longer, which is the advantages of having non-commercial television. But give us a little update on what Wirepoints is, because you constantly put information out there, and people may want to know about it.
Well, we're optimistic that Illinois can be fixed. We don't know if it has to have a crisis first, but our goal is to be the fiscal realists, to put out the research, the information, the commentary, trying to tell the truth about what's really happening. And it can be a little bit disheartening because there's not a whole lot of good things going on in Illinois. We're motivated by an Illinois that has all these great assets and has this huge potential to be what it should be. And, I always talk about when my parents came here in the late 50s, early 60s, this was the magnet for people across from all over the world. This is where you could come, grit it out, work hard, and make it. And so this is why Chicago and Illinois just boomed. Today we're going the opposite way. We're shrinking, which tells us that we have the wrong policies. And so our goal is to make sure that people understand the fiscal reality of it. What are the solutions to get there, and what ordinary residents should be demanding of their political elite. and we should hold them accountable. Right now, too many people are holding them accountable by leaving, and that's certainly one way to do it, but that just makes Illinois weaker every day. Our goal is to keep people here and eventually turn it around and have people coming here, businesses coming here, and we grow and we boom because we're an exciting place to be. We don't want today's Chicago and Illinois. We need to flip it back to the great place it can be.
And again, I will say, this is what the national economy has done over the last 50 years. Ladies and gentlemen, if we can't grow financially strong when we're riding an economic wave that is that positive, then again, that tells you your systems are broken, because it's not going to get much better than what we've done over the last 50 years that you can see on the screen. Ted, let's hope that changes are made and that we can turn this ship around for the betterment of both the taxpayers and those who live in Illinois and who are the paying property taxes and those who receive pension benefits.
Great. Well, thanks, Terry, for letting us share our story here, and appreciate it.
Well, and we appreciate your input, and we'll look forward to talking to you again before too long. Thank you.
Take care.